So I'm Leslie Francis, and I'm so delighted to see everybody here. This is sponsored by our Center on Lawn Bioscience and also help from the new popular section of the Utah State Bar. And I'm going to turn it over briefly to my wonderful Dean, Bob.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Let me add my welcome to this roundtable on the future of gene patenting, put on by our new Center for Law and Biomedical Sciences, one of our many exciting new initiatives at the College of Law. There's a huge range of fascinating issues at the intersection of law, bioethics, biomedical sciences. The issue of gene patenting is just one of many such fascinating issues. I want to begin by taking a moment to note that under the really visionary leadership of my colleague, Dean Leslie Francis, Associate Dean Leslie Francis, and her colleagues in the faculty, they are putting on a number of programs over the next couple of years, working on an increasingly wide range of these issues in health policy, biotechnology, bioethics. You're doing so in a highly interdisciplinary way, and you're doing so in ways that bring in a range of viewpoints. So today is really just an example of the type of programming that we can look forward to in the future. Here we've got a pivotal Supreme Court decision, a very controversial issue, a diverse set of viewpoints approached from an interdisciplinary perspective. We're really looking forward to a stimulating but constructive dialogue about these issues. In addition to Dean Francis, there are a few people I want to thank for putting together this program. Jackie Morrison, who is sitting over there, who is providing professional support, not just for this center, but for 3 other centers in the law school. So she really has a tremendous amount on her plate, and I really want to acknowledge the tremendous work that Jackie has done. As usual, the IT staff and the event staff at the College of Law have done their usual tremendous work in putting together this event. And there's a number of students and faculty members who work together to put together this tremendous panel of expertise. Last but not least, I want to thank the panel itself for being here, and I want to thank all of you for being here. And with that, I will turn the program over to Leslie.
So we've organized this to come in 3 sets. The idea is we'll have first two talks about the science and what the case actually did. That will be Ken Chahine, who is my colleague here at the law school and in the center. He teaches new ventures. He has both advanced degrees in bioscience and a JD, and he's going to give us a tour of the genetics. Then my colleague Amelia Reinhardt, who is going to who is a patent law specialist, IP law specialist. She's going to talk to us about what the case held, and so we'll start with that. After those 2 speakers, we'll have a few minutes for clarificatory questions, things you didn't understand, not arguing about things. Then the next panel is going to be made up of Brian Dawson, Laboratory Director at Mayo Clinic. Mayo Labs, right? Mayo Clinic, yeah. And Elaine Lyon from in a similar position at AWA, and also the president-elect of the Association of Molecular Pathologists. And they're going to be speaking from their perspective of both laboratory developments and the role of molecular pathologists. Then the last panel is going to be made up of, I'll just go in the order you're sitting here, Wendy Coleman, who is a genetics counselor who counsels patients up at the Huntsman here. John Mejia, who is from the ACL, a lawyer at the ACLU of Utah. And then finally, Ben Jackson, who is at Marine Genetics as a lawyer. So if there are much fuller descriptions of folks in the actual program, and I don't want to take any more time because there's so much richness here. So Ken, over.
Thank you, Leslie. Really glad to be here. I'm assuming, is this
Oh, slide clicker? Oh, please, yeah. There we go.
Okay, there you go. So my role here today is really to sort of set the stage. So I apologize to the geneticist. I'm going to go through really quickly through some of the science, but I really ultimately want to make sure that everyone understands when we talk about, like when we talk about isolated genes and cDNA, so at least you have some, visual or an understanding of what it is, what are the elements we're actually talking about, so that when other colleagues and other panelists come up, you understand. I'm also going to try to set the stage a little bit with respect to what's happened in genetics and why are we here today talking about this versus 5 or 10 years ago. Like what has transpired in the space. So I start off, I don't have a dog in this fight, right? So I don't own any of the myriad stock or have any incentives. I am also a senior vice president of Ancestry.com. I run the DNA division, so I want to disclose that we also have no patents in the gene space whatsoever. So whatever my position is here has no bearing on that. We have made a decision not to do any of that. And finally, I just want to make it clear, and it probably is, that obviously my opinions are my own, not Ancestry's. I don't represent the University of Utah, so I'm speaking here as a scientist and a patent. So I want to start off with this slide. It's familiar to some, hopefully it's new to a few of you, but basically this is a pretty amazing graph that just basically shows what's happened since roughly the year 2000 when we sequenced the first genome, human genome. I think it took us 15 years and about $2-3 billion to do one human. I had mine sequenced last year. It was $5,000, and I think it took a couple weeks. Okay, so just to put this in perspective, right? It's dropped. I think it was 6 orders of magnitude since the year 2000. If you had a car that you filled the tank up and you could drive from here to Las Vegas on that tank of gas in 2000, and fuel efficiency had improved at the same rate, right? You could do that. That same tank of gas would take you to Jupiter and back today. Okay, so we are really talking about just incredible amounts of efficiency that really never has been seen in probably any other area. So this has been really what's been driving, I think, a lot of this conversation. So look, the genome is 23 pairs of chromosomes, 22 autosomal, and an X or a Y. Our head of genomic research is a woman, and she calls it the Y chromosome. You see the little stubby one. She calls it the crippled X. Yeah, we either have an X or a Y or 2 X's. And another way of looking at the chromosomes are lined up here. And if you want to kind of visually understand, BRCA1 and BRCA2 sort of sit at chromosome 13 and 17. And if we go a little deeper, I sort of split it up, and I'll explain the colors in a second. But if you go a little deeper into the gene, you see that they're split up into different regions. Some are called introns and exons, and I'll go into that a little bit in a second. And if you go a little even one step further, what you end up seeing is nucleotides. And a good analogy would be that your genome is like a book. The chromosomes are like chapters, and as you get deeper and deeper into the genes, you're looking at sort of paragraphs and sentences and ultimately letters. And that's what you're seeing here, these nucleotides. They become very important because that's a lot of what we're actually looking at when we're seeing is someone predisposed or not to breast cancer or any other disease. Now there is an intervening step that I regret that I have to show, but I think I do because of a key element in the case, and that is a messenger RNA. So basically what ends up happening is the gene, for whatever let's say BRCA1, is sort of divided into different chunks. And there's one step in genetics that occurs for a lot of reasons I'm not going to get into, where you create something called the messenger RNA. And parts of the genome that don't code for the protein get spliced out, and the other parts that actually do code for the protein sort of come together into one molecule, okay? And that allows for the next step, which is that you take this mRNA to allow it, that's what sort of allows you to translate it, as we say, into a protein, okay? And ultimately, I think it's important. We talk so much about the gene, but I think the gene and whether you're predisposed and looking at the gene is really ultimately a surrogate for saying, is this protein functioning the way we expect it to function, right? And it's just, that's really what we kind of do. We really care about whether the protein working well or not. The DNA being the blueprint for the protein sort of is a nice way of actually giving us an indication of what's going to happen to the actual data. So mutations are just errors that occur. And one of the things we look at a lot at Ancestry is that every time you pass on your genes to the next generation, out of all of the human genome, you get about 100 to 200 errors that occur. Most of the time, those errors really don't result in anything, but frequently they occur in important parts of your genome, and they do cause issues. And in tumor cells, what's happening is you're having these mutations either through some environmental event or just by chance, and you get this event. Sometimes, again, many times it doesn't result in anything, sometimes it does result in something. Okay? So when we're looking at mutations, we're really looking at that very, so the nucleotides, the very deepest part of the genome. And this is just one from the National Cancer Institute, just to show you that in BRCA1 alone, there are so many different mutations that occur, right? So it can occur in a lot of different areas of the genome. They have more or less impact on how the protein works and what your predisposition is. It's extremely complicated, and I think for the panelists that are coming after me are going to explain why some of this is so important to the space. One thing I did want to sort of share, just because just from talking to people, the common view of sort of genetic testing is this idea that, hey, you discover a gene, you get the test, and bam, we just tell you if you're predisposed or not to this disease, as if it's all written in stone somewhere. There's like if your genome came with a dictionary that says, oh yeah, look, you have this mutation here, that means you have a X% chance or increased chance of getting this disease. Far from it. It's a very complicated area. And most of the time what we're struggling right now is what are the gene or genes that actually even cause this disease? And frequently we see associations where certain genes are associated with certain disease, but does it actually really cause it? That becomes really, really hard. And I've always joked that it's harder than a needle in a haystack, because at least the needle looks different than the straw, right? I mean, this is basically like a certain piece of straw in a haystack. And it's very hard for scientists to actually figure out and get that causation right, that this gene is actually causing this disease. Even when we get there, right, there's always the issue of, boy, we see so many of these mutations. So the question is, does this mutation cause it, or is this mutation just something that just occurred that really isn't manifesting itself in disease? That becomes really hard. And even when you get that, I would argue that, boy, then how do you communicate something like that to the patient, right? Okay, now you know you have a mutation in your gene, but let's say that's only been seen 5 times or 10 times. How do you advise someone to take medical action on something where you have such little data, right? So just want you to appreciate that there's really a fair amount that goes into this, both on the discovery side and I think ultimately in interpreting to patients. So just to get to what is covered in the actual patent, there's really, like I would say 3, or at least 3 that I'm covering right now. One is an isolated gene, okay? And an isolated gene is fairly straightforward. It's just, if this is the BRCA1 gene here, an isolated gene is literally taking the exact part of that genome out. And you notice here that I've kept the genome, this sort of keeps going, because this is part of the chromosome, right? So there's going to be a gene downstream over here, and there's going to be a gene downstream here. So basically what you've done is isolated it and separated it from the entire genome. So when we're talking for the rest of the symposium about an isolated gene, that's what I want you to sort of visualize, is that it's been just sort of taken out of its natural setting. But it's otherwise, for all intents and purposes, let's say it's identical. Okay? And then I told you I had regretted I had to bring up mRNA, but the reason I have to bring up the mRNA is that there's another molecule that is in the court case that we're going to discuss that's called the complementary DNA. And the complementary DNA, for our purposes, is just imagine it as being a mirror image of mRNA. Okay? And the reason we really do this, and I did a lot of this in grad school, is the cDNA is a lot more stable, it allows you to manipulate it a lot better, and ultimately, the key thing to the cDNA is that you can make recombinant proteins. So right now, if you look at insulin or EPO or human growth hormone, all of those are made off of this molecule. The mRNA is too unstable to natural form, and so we use the cDNA. So when we talk about that, sort of think about it as the piece of DNA that allows you to make a protein recombinant, because I think if you think about that, I think you're probably in the right frame. And then ultimately, the patent does cover some mutations. So Myriad and others have identified certain mutations that, as I mentioned, they correlated and said, yeah, these are causative. When you see this, you're going to see, you're going to get disease, you're going to have a predisposition to disease. And so in many cases, Myriad had actually tried to patent the individual mutations that they had discovered. So before I go, I'm just going to leave you with a few things. Remember, I'm a patent attorney, so I've just got to clarify one thing. No one owns your genes, okay? So when people say that, it's honestly, I know it's a shorthand, but it's really just not true. In patent law, there's no way Myriad or anyone else could actually patent the gene that you have. You had it before they discovered it, you were using it. Myriad can't own your gene. Now, you could say, boy, it's a really subtle difference to say it's isolated or not, and that's fine, but literally no one owns the gene that you have. The other thing is, you know, that I always question, I don't have an answer for this, but it's questions I ponder is, you know, how does a drop in the price of sequencing really influence this entire debate, you know? Because there's so many other things out there that are so expensive, and just how cheap it is and how easy it is to do something that is, frankly, you know, very complicated, if you will, scientifically, but to get the data itself has become really easy. It's almost like getting on the internet, right? What you do with it is a different issue, but getting on the internet is pretty easy, right? And so getting sequences is really easy. What you do with it is, I think, going to be a lot, you know, much of the harder part. The other thing that's really interesting is the FDA doesn't regulate this space. This is regulated under another regulation called CLIA. It doesn't go through the typical FDA approval. And I've always wondered if the FDA tomorrow decided they were going to regulate this type of testing and other genetic testing and increase the barriers to entry, you know, how would this debate be different than it is today? Don't have an answer for that either, but I do think that's an interesting question. And then the other one that I struggle with as well is how is this different than any other patents? You know, I was talking to a friend yesterday about this symposium, and I said, look, if we take you to the doctor today, or the hospital today, and you have to get an MRI, you're going to get an MRI from GE, and that's the MRI you get, right? You're not going to get to pick what MRI machine you get, because it's patented. And the same thing, I don't know if insulin's off patent yet, but for a long time, Genentech had, you know, basically a monopoly on insulin, and Amgen still has a monopoly on erythropoietin, right? So just to keep in mind that this is in some ways not an isolated case, right? We have patents on critical medical technologies that create limited monopolies, and those have an impact on all of healthcare. So those are just there to ponder as some of the other speakers. You know.